Well, you know, it's time for Explain and Verify. Samgele Masego is here to tell us what he is tracking for us. Samgele?
Well, Bongiwe, tonight we look and explain in what is in the spotlight on the agricultural sector, its broad-based black economic empowerment objectives, how those who have played out in the face of these tariffs, how BEE is going to play out in the face of these particular tariffs being rolled out by the United States of America. Agriculture in South Africa, like everywhere else in the world, is closely aligned to land ownership. Earlier this year, President Ramaphosa noted that while the country's agricultural exports reached a record $13.7 billion in 2024, black farmers only contribute around 10% of the commercial output within the country, Bongiwe. Of the 930,000 people currently employed directly in agriculture, most are black farmers in rural communities who do not own land and farms they work on. This, according to President Ramaphosa, emphasizes the need for bias towards empowerment of black farmers, and the bias comes in the form of broad-based economic empowerment guided by indicators including land and equity ownership, management control, and employment equity. For instance, if you look at broad-based black economic empowerment indicators in agriculture, land and equity ownership, management control, empowerment equity, skills development, preferential procurement, enterprise development, socio-economic development. This all directly speaks to one of the clauses of the Freedom Charter, that the people shall own their land that they work in, the people shall share the land that they work, which speaks directly to land ownership within the country, and also the Expropriation Act with nil compensation, which the DA is currently contesting.
And right there on that point, it's quite interesting, right, to see that President Cyril Ramaphosa has given this portfolio to someone who's been a staunch critic, the political party, a staunch critic of the BEE.
That's the paradox of it. Broad-based black economic empowerment seeks to level the field and address the ownership patterns of the past, bearing in mind that some people still wonder why President Ramaphosa entrusted the agricultural ministry, and in one of which transformation has been especially slow, to the DA's John Steenhuisen, whose party is very critical of broad-based black economic empowerment. Recently, in the United States of America, in a different conversation that has been happening between President Donald Trump's understanding of broad-based black economic empowerment is that it allows for illegal confiscation of white-owned land, which is a lie, putting the lives of farmers at risk. This, along with South Africa's BRICS participation and what Trump calls deficits and barriers, has not put the country in the good books of the United States of America and President Trump's administration. As a result, Trump's 30% tariffs on local goods are now in effect, and farmers are expected to be amongst the hardest hit, and perhaps now more than ever. Whatever issues exist around broad-based black economic empowerment, the sector needs someone who, like Ramaphosa, believes is that will be in the room to negotiate with the United States of America. Let's just listen to what President Ramaphosa had to say.
On our African continent, we are the largest economy and the most industrialized economy on the continent. So obviously we will be a target, and because we export more than many other countries. So our task is to negotiate as strongly and as hard as we can with the United States.
On Monday, Minister Steenhuisen noted that South Africa's exports increased in the second quarter of 2025 to $161 million, up by 26% from the same period in 2024. Agricultural economist Wandile Sihlobo unpacks this latest development and says that these numbers can be attributed to producers producing to ship goods out in 90 days before the tariffs are kicked in. Let's just listen to what the economist had to say.
If you look at how much South Africa sent to the world, we sent out agricultural exports of about $3.71 billion. That was up 10% from the previous same period last year. And if you were to ask what are the key drivers of that, the one aspect was the fact that we genuinely have a fantastic agricultural season in fruits and in grains more so. And of course, on livestock, we still struggle with animal diseases and other things. Now, the U.S. market is is part and parcel of that. It is about 4% again of our exports, even in the second quarter, but having shown that massive jump of 26%. We are monitoring these exports closely because, of course, we want to see where the pain points of these tariffs begin to come in. But I think that massive jump into the US is two factors behind it. One is the fact that we've had a fantastic citrus harvest, so the volumes were great. Two, there are many stakeholders and traders that were actually really pushing the volume within this 90-day pause.
Steenhuisen, who insists and supports the transformation in his sector, says while lines of communication with the United States remain open, there is an urgent need for diversity and diversification over the exports markets to enhance competitiveness. To achieve that, South Africa must address the biggest challenges in the sector, including transportation, load shedding, water infrastructure and animal diseases, which speaks directly to the locomotive sector, Bongiwe, that must be sorted out in order to be able to get these particular goods from the various citrus and other agricultural parts of our country, to get those products into the various harbors that are used to export these goods out of the country and into the international markets, which looks at South Africa's freight rail industry that we spoke about last week, in bringing in private-public partnerships in order to expedite and to get our goods into efficiently run ports that will also bring in private and public sector players, which is one of the issues that is being fast-tracked, particularly when it comes to the improving the efficiency of state-owned enterprises within the country.
And it's going to be interesting because when you think about what we were talking about last week and now, there is always that concern that you have an overload of trucks on the road, for example, and that also speaks to the issue of infrastructure. But it's been an ongoing conversation for years now.
It's an ongoing conversation for years now, but if you look at what is being rolled out by Transnet and by PRASA, particularly in fixing the freight rail industry within the country, I just saw a number of lines within the terminal parts of the corridors of PRASA in KwaZulu-Natal. They are fixing them tremendously at an exponential rate, but now the problem is fixing the freight rail that is under Transnet, which was largely used for the export of goods into the international markets, which will help expedite South Africa's exports within the agricultural sector, the mining sector, and other sector that are exporting industries, particularly the automotive sector, which President Ramaphosa is currently speaking on in Japan within that particular summit that is currently in, where South Africa looks to be an important player within the EV sector, the electronic vehicle sector, in order to export these particular vehicles to the export markets. We have seen in the past where the Premier of the Eastern Cape, Oscar Mabuyane, has said that he got a very troubling text from the CEO of Mercedes-Benz in East London that they would have to lay off about 300 workers, which will negatively impact and affect the economy of the Eastern Cape, and in particular East London. Princess Fagu, the mayor of Buffalo City, as well, has also expressed that they need to resolve the issue of the tariffs with the United States of America, because it will negatively affect the employees of Mercedes-Benz in East London, which will negatively create more unemployment, poverty and inequality and underdevelopment within that specific metro within the country. So it is pretty much an interlinked aspect of these particular tariffs and opening up new markets. You go to Gwede Mantashe, the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy, who's openly said that South Africa should not purely focus on the second biggest economy they are trading with in the form of the United States of America, and create other markets so that our economy is not solely dependent on the exports and the trade that we are doing with the United States of America, but look at trading our minerals with other countries, particularly within the BRICS formation. You'd also understand how John Steenhuisen, the Minister of Agriculture, has been very emphatic to saying that China is a very important market to trade in, and speaking about Minister John Steenhuisen, let's just listen to what he had to say on these particular issues of tariffs with the United States of America.
Foot and mouth disease does huge damage to our potential for access to international markets, whether it's Europe, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's China. And if we get it under control, I think it's going to open up a whole new opportunity for the livestock sector in South Africa, with many, many more opportunities for jobs and economic growth.
All these things considered, broad-based black economic empowerment is a major legislative pillar in our country, and with global trade wars being volatile, the situation calls for a hands-on deck regardless of race, and with minimal political grandstanding. It remains to be seen if the agricultural sector will find balance between transformation and surviving trade disputes, Bongiwe. And that speaks directly to what Minister John Steenhuisen. If I remember correctly, I spoke to him during a press briefing recently, and he spoke about how Brazil had the issue of foot and mouth disease within their country when it comes to producing of beef. And they've gone up a rating when it comes to the particular export of beef. And today they have recorded in the last financial year their biggest export of beef products from Brazil to the international markets. And that just speaks to the potential that South Africa has, particularly when you look at how BRICS countries, particularly within the Middle East, China, Iran, they require lots of beef exports nowadays, with their cultures being opened up and their markets opening up. That is markets that South Africa can particularly play in. I remember in Saudi Arabia in 2022, in the Saudi Arabia-South Africa bilateral meetings between President Ramaphosa and the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia, South Africa, through one of the biggest producing beef companies within the country, I'm not going to mention them for free advertising, but just as a hint, they bought triple beef in KwaZulu-Natal. So anyone who's well-researched would know which company I'm speaking about. I won't mention them, but they are essentially benefiting from those particular trade deals that were signed in 2022 in Saudi Arabia for them to export large contingent of lamb and mutton into the Saudi Arabian market. I think in one clip that was done by our colleague Lerato Fekese in the Eastern Cape, Premier Oscar Maboyane saw a large contingent of sheep being exported out into the Saudi Arabian market, and also looking at how the Qataris are trying to build a relationship with South Africa, and particularly with the Eastern Cape being one of the biggest producing provinces of that particular sector of sheep within the country. That will stand to benefit the country greatly. And also the Minister of Agriculture beefing up South Africa's exports when it comes to beef. South Africa will truly benefit, but will that benefit be for those who are currently in the mainstream of the agricultural sector, or will the sector be broadened to bring in other sectors, other racial demographics, using this policy of broad-based black economic empowerment that must not only benefit a select tiny clique that is politically aligned to any other political formation within the country, because this issue of political alignment, it is always genuinely linked to one particular political party. But all of these parties have business cliques that they seem to empower directly or indirectly.
Samgele, we'll have to leave it there. That is Samgele Masego with Explain and Verify. You do not want to miss next week's edition to see what exactly he will be explaining and verifying for you. We'll take a short break and we'll tell you what's coming up on Face the Nation.